Nurse called a billionaire and said, "Your daughter is lying unconscious in the hospital." What happened next? Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The phone call came in at exactly 2:43 p.m., just as Nurse Amy was finishing her lunch break. She had just stepped outside to catch a breath of fresh air when the hospital's emergency line rang, the harsh sound slicing through the quiet afternoon. "Hello, this is Nurse Amy," she answered, her voice calm but professional. The voice on the other end was frantic, the words tumbling out in a rush. "This is Mr. Caldwell. My daughter, Jennifer, has been in an accident. I was told she's in critical condition. Please, I need to know what's going on." Amy's heart skipped a beat. The name Caldwell immediately struck her, the billionaire businessman whose company was a staple in the city. He was known for his cold demeanor, his wealth, and his family's high-profile life. His daughter, Jennifer, had been in the tabloids countless times, known for her extravagant lifestyle and occasional charity work. But none of that mattered right now. "Mr. Caldwell, please try to remain calm. I will check her status immediately," Amy replied, her hands trembling slightly as she jotted down the details. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This was no ordinary patient. Jennifer Caldwell was a name that everyone at the hospital knew, and now she was lying unconscious in one of their beds, fighting for her life. As Amy walked briskly toward the intensive care unit, her mind raced. What had happened to Jennifer? How did the daughter of one of the wealthiest men in the country end up in such a state? She had heard whispers earlier in the day, rumors of a car crash on the outskirts of town, but no details. Now it was clear. The city was about to hold its breath, waiting to see if the young heiress would pull through. Entering the room, Amy saw Jennifer lying motionless on the bed, hooked up to several machines. Her heart monitor beeped steadily, but there was no sign of consciousness. Amy approached carefully, her mind racing. The only sounds were the rhythmic beeping of the monitor and the soft hum of the air conditioning. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. This wasn't just another patient. This was a chance for Amy to make a difference. And yet, she couldn't help but feel a nagging doubt. What was her role in this? She had no connection to the Caldwell family, just a nurse doing her job. But as she checked the monitors and adjusted the four, Amy couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just medical care. She was about to step into a world she knew little about. A world of wealth, power, and family secrets. Amy took one last glance at Jennifer's unconscious form. She couldn't help but wonder, what was this billionaire father really like? Was he the cold, distant man that the media painted him to be? Or was there more to him than met the eye? As Amy prepared to call Mr. Caldwell with the latest update, she couldn't help but feel the weight of what was to come. She had no idea how this story would unfold, but one thing was certain. It would change her life forever. As Nurse Amy walked out of the intensive care unit, she could still feel the weight of the situation. The room where Jennifer Caldwell lay unconscious felt heavy with unspoken tension, and her mind kept circling back to the conversation she'd just had with Mr. Caldwell. He had sounded distant over the phone, almost detached, but there was a flicker of concern in his voice that Amy couldn't ignore. As she made her way down the hallway to the nurse's station, she was interrupted by the familiar sound of a phone ringing. Without looking, she picked up the receiver. "Nurse Amy." It was Mr. Caldwell's voice again, crisp and urgent. "How is my daughter?" He sounded more agitated now, the calm exterior slipping away. "Mr. Caldwell, we're doing everything we can," Amy responded, trying to remain professional. "Her condition is stable for now, but we're waiting on further tests." There was a long pause on the other end, and then he spoke again, his voice almost pleading this time. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't let anything happen to her." Amy hung up the phone and stared at the receiver for a moment. She wasn't used to dealing with people like Mr. Caldwell, the wealthy, powerful businessman who ran things with an iron fist. But there was something about him, something raw in his words that made her hesitate. It was almost as if he truly cared about his daughter, despite his cold reputation. As the minutes ticked by, Amy couldn't help but think about what it must be like for Jennifer. Here she was, a young woman with a life full of privilege, lying in a hospital bed, completely unaware of the world around her. Her father, a billionaire, would rush to her side now, but what would he find? A daughter he barely knew? A girl who had lived her life in the public eye, but perhaps felt lonely and isolated? Amy knew that no matter how much wealth or power someone had, they couldn't buy back the time they lost with their family. A nurse entered the room, breaking Amy's train of thought. She's still stable, but we need to keep monitoring her vitals closely, the nurse said, her voice soft but firm. Amy nodded and returned to the bedside, her heart heavy with the weight of responsibility. When Mr. Caldwell arrived, his presence filled the room like a storm. His tailored suit, his confident stride. He was a man who was used to being in control. But as he approached Jennifer's bed and saw his daughter lying there, unconscious, something in his expression shifted. His steely exterior cracked, just for a moment. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he reached out and gently took Jennifer's hand in his. Amy watched from a distance, sensing the complexity of the moment. This was a man who had everything: wealth, power, influence. But in this moment, he was powerless. His daughter's life hung in the balance, and no amount of money could change that. "Is she going to be okay?" Mr. Caldwell finally asked, his voice softer than Amy had expected. She stepped forward, trying to reassure him. "We're doing everything we can. It's too early to tell, but she's hanging on." There was a flicker of hope in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by doubt. "I should have been there for her," he muttered under his breath, almost to himself. I didn't realize how far apart we had drifted." Amy glanced at Jennifer, then back at Mr. Caldwell. This wasn't just about saving a life anymore. It was about something deeper, something more human. "It's never too late to make things right," Amy said quietly. Mr. Caldwell didn't respond right away, but he squeezed his daughter's hand gently. Amy could see the change in him. The moment he realized that perhaps the most important thing he could do now was not to fix everything, but to simply be present. For the first time, she saw him as more than just a businessman. She saw him as a father, afraid of losing his only child. And that made all the difference. Nurse Amy stood quietly by the door, watching as Mr. Caldwell continued to hold his daughter's hand. The room was filled with a heavy silence, the kind that only comes with the awareness of life and death hanging in the balance. She could tell the man was struggling with guilt, regret for all the time he had not spent with Jennifer, for all the years he had focused solely on his business empire, letting his relationship with his daughter deteriorate in the process. "She's always been strong," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper, as he looked at Jennifer's motionless body. "But I don't know if I can fix this." Amy approached him slowly, trying to comfort him without overstepping. "You're here now," she said gently. "That's what matters." His eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, he looked vulnerable, like a man who had lost everything. "I've spent my life building things, but when it comes to my family, I've built nothing," he said, his voice cracking slightly. Amy nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She had seen this before, seen people who had it all, but still felt empty inside. "It's never too late to start," she said quietly. "She needs you now more than ever." Mr. Caldwell let out a slow breath, as if considering her words. For the first time, he seemed to realize that his wealth and power meant nothing in this moment. All that mattered was Jennifer's recovery, and his role in helping her find her way back. He stood up from the chair, looking down at Jennifer with a new sense of resolve. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said firmly, his voice steady now. Amy was surprised by the shift in his demeanor. This man, who had seemed so distant and cold earlier, was now determined to be there for his daughter. It was a small but significant victory. Just then, the door opened, and the attending physician walked in. "Mr. Caldwell, Nurse Amy," the doctor said, his tone professional but soft. "We've run some additional tests, and we're starting to see some positive changes. Her vitals are stabilizing." The relief in Mr. Caldwell's face was immediate, though his concern still lingered. "Is she going to be okay?" he asked, his voice filled with hope. "It's too early to say for certain," the doctor replied, "but we're cautiously optimistic." Amy watched as Mr. Caldwell sat back down, his eyes never leaving his daughter. She could see the flicker of hope in his eyes, and for the first time, she believed that this family might have a chance to heal. As the hours passed, Mr. Caldwell refused to leave Jennifer's side. He asked Amy and the other nurses about every aspect of her care, making sure he understood what needed to be done to help her recover. He no longer seemed like the detached businessman. He had transformed into a father who would do anything to save his daughter. "I'm sorry," he said quietly to Amy later in the evening, when they were alone for a moment. "I didn't realize what I was missing. I've been blind to the things that really matter." Amy smiled softly, her heart swelling with a quiet sense of satisfaction. "It's never easy, but it's never too late," she said, her voice warm with encouragement. "The road ahead won't be easy, but as long as you're here, you're doing the right thing." Mr. Caldwell nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude. For the first time, Amy saw a man who had the potential to rebuild not just his daughter's health, but their relationship, and perhaps their family. It was a moment of hope, and in a hospital full of uncertain futures, that was a rare thing. As she left the room to check on other patients, Amy felt a renewed sense of purpose. There was still much work to be done, but she knew that Jennifer had a chance. And that was all that mattered. Nurse Amy watched as Mr. Caldwell stood by his daughter's bed, his hands still clasped around Jennifer's. His demeanor had shifted completely. Gone was the cold, distant billionaire she had first met. In his place was a father who had finally realized what he had almost lost. The changes in Jennifer's condition were subtle but promising. Her vitals had stabilized, and the doctors were hopeful. But it was clear to Amy that the true healing would come not just from medical care, but from the emotional bond between father and daughter. As the hours passed, Mr. Caldwell had refused to leave the hospital. He had become a constant presence in Jennifer's room, asking Amy countless questions about her care, the medications she was receiving, and when she might wake up. Amy, usually the one offering comfort and guidance, found herself learning from him as well. Despite his initial coldness, Mr. Caldwell had shown a deep, genuine concern for his daughter's recovery. It was clear he regretted the years he had spent focused solely on his empire. He had missed out on the most important thing in life, his family. Amy had seen many cases of families torn apart by wealth and ambition, but there was something about Mr. Caldwell's determination to make things right that gave her hope. That evening, after a long day of monitoring Jennifer's progress, Amy decided to take a break and step outside for a breath of fresh air. The sky was beginning to darken as night fell, and the cold air was a welcome contrast to the sterile warmth of the hospital. As she sat on the bench outside, her mind kept drifting back to the situation inside. Jennifer was still unconscious, but it was clear that Mr. Caldwell's presence was having an impact. He was no longer the aloof businessman who kept his emotions hidden. He was a father, vulnerable and raw, desperate to hold on to the daughter he had once neglected. Just as Amy was lost in thought, she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to see Mr. Caldwell standing behind her, his expression one of quiet determination. "Nurse Amy," he said, his voice firm yet soft, "can we talk?" She stood up, her curiosity piqued. "Of course," she replied, leading him to a quieter part of the courtyard. "I've been thinking a lot today," he began, his eyes distant as if he were searching for the right words. "I've spent my whole life building my company, chasing success, but now I realize I've neglected the one thing that matters most." Amy didn't say anything, allowing him the space to speak. "I wasn't there for Jennifer when she needed me. I wasn't there for her birthday, her school plays, her graduation. I was always too busy. And now, I might lose her." There was a rawness in his voice that surprised Amy. She had never seen him like this before, so open and vulnerable. "Mr. Caldwell, it's never too late," she said gently. "You're here now? That's what matters. And Jennifer, she's still holding on. She's a fighter." He nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I never thought I could lose her. But now, I'm not going to let go. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right, to make sure she knows I'm here for her." Amy smiled softly. "You're already doing it. Being here, showing her that you care, that's the first step." Mr. Caldwell's expression softened. "Thank you, Nurse Amy. You've done more for me and Jennifer than anyone else. I know it's not just the medicine, it's you. You've helped me see things differently." Amy was taken aback by his words. "I'm just doing my job," she replied. "But I'm glad I could help." As they stood there in the cool night air, something shifted in the hospital. It was no longer just a place where people came to heal physically. It was a place where families could rediscover the ties that bound them, where broken relationships could start to mend. Mr. Caldwell was no longer just a businessman. He was a father who had finally found the courage to reconnect with his daughter. And Amy, the nurse who had seen countless patients, had found a renewed sense of purpose. She was reminded that healing wasn't just about fixing the body, it was about restoring the heart. With renewed determination, Mr. Caldwell returned to Jennifer's room, his heart full of hope. He was ready to face the challenges ahead, ready to be the father Jennifer needed. And Amy, watching from a distance, knew this was just the beginning of a long, emotional journey for this family. Night had settled in, but for Mr. Caldwell, the worry and exhaustion were still there. The sterile hospital room had become a small world of its own. Outside, the world continued to turn, but inside, it felt as if time had stopped. Amy glanced over at him as he sat by Jennifer's bed, his posture slouched, his gaze fixed on his daughter. She could see the toll it was taking on him. He had always been a man of action, used to solving problems with strategy and precision, but here, there was no blueprint to follow. There was only the slow, uncertain process of waiting and hoping. As the hours passed, Amy continued her rounds, but she made it a point to stop by Jennifer's room as often as she could. She noticed the subtle changes in Mr. Caldwell. The harshness that had once been in his eyes was now replaced with something softer, a tenderness, almost. His phone buzzed on the bedside table, but he ignored it, choosing instead to stay by Jennifer's side. It was clear now that this was more than just a father trying to keep his composure. This was a man who was beginning to understand the depth of the responsibility he had to his daughter. That evening, as the hospital grew quieter, Amy stopped by again. "She's holding steady," she said, her voice calm, trying to reassure him, though she knew the worry was still there. Mr. Caldwell nodded, but didn't say anything. Amy stood there for a moment, unsure of what else to say. "You're doing the right thing," she added softly, glancing at Jennifer. "Just being here. She can feel that." Mr. Caldwell's eyes lingered on his daughter. "I never thought it would be like this," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought I could handle everything, fix everything. But now, I realized that what matters most was always right in front of me. My daughter. I've been blind." Amy could feel the weight of his words. She had seen this before, the struggle of a father, so consumed with work that the people closest to him faded into the background. But what she saw now was a man who was slowly awakening, realizing that success meant nothing if you lost the people you loved in the process. "It's never too late," she said again, with more conviction this time. "You're here now? That's what counts." Mr. Caldwell finally turned to her, his face softer than it had been. "In days, I've always been able to fix things, to make things better, but I've never had to fix a relationship before, and I don't even know where to start." Amy smiled gently. "You're already doing it. By showing up. By staying. It's not about fixing everything all at once. It's about being here, in the moment, for her. That's where healing begins." There was a long pause as he absorbed her words. "Thank you, Nurse Amy. You've been more help than you know. I don't know if she would have made it through this without your care and without your presence. I think I'm finally starting to understand." Amy didn't reply immediately. She just nodded, feeling the quiet weight of the situation. In the stillness of the room, she watched as Mr. Caldwell reached for Jennifer's hand again, holding it gently but firmly. For the first time since the accident, he looked like a father who wasn't just worried about his daughter's physical health, but also about rebuilding what had been broken. Later that night, as Amy checked on other patients, she couldn't help but think about what had just transpired. Mr. Caldwell was still a businessman at his core, but he was also a man who had begun to understand that love, patience, and presence were the true measures of success. When she returned to Jennifer's room, she saw the change in the atmosphere. There was hope in the air. It was still a long road to recovery for Jennifer and for Mr. Caldwell, but the first steps had been taken. They were no longer just two strangers caught in a moment of crisis. They were father and daughter, slowly finding their way back to each other. Amy didn't know how the story would unfold, but she knew this. The healing process wasn't just for Jennifer. It was for her father too. And in that moment, she had a renewed sense of hope for both of them. Night passed, and the hospital room was quieter now, a subtle shift in the air. Jennifer's condition was still critical, but she was holding on. Amy could see the progress, no matter how small. Mr. Caldwell had not left her side. The long hours spent at his daughter's bedside had transformed him. No longer was he the cold, distant billionaire she had first encountered. Now he was a father who, for the first time, understood what really mattered. Amy continued her rounds, checking on other patients, but her thoughts often returned to Jennifer and her father. Every time she passed their room, she noticed how Mr. Caldwell had settled into the routine. He asked the nurses questions, learned about the treatments, and even started bringing in books to read to Jennifer, hoping it would somehow help her wake up. He was doing everything he could to repair not just his daughter's body, but their relationship. But for Amy, the transformation wasn't just about physical healing. It was about the emotional walls Mr. Caldwell had torn down. When she came into Jennifer's room early the next morning, Mr. Caldwell was sitting in the chair beside the bed, his hand gently resting on Jennifer's. His eyes were closed, and for a moment, Amy wasn't sure if he was asleep or simply lost in thought. He looked different, softer, more at peace, as if the past few days had peeled away the years of emotional distance. Amy hesitated before entering, not wanting to disturb the moment. But as she stepped inside, Mr. Caldwell opened his eyes and smiled at her. It was the first genuine smile she had seen from him in days. "Good morning, Nurse Amy," he said, his voice warm but still heavy with the weight of the past. "How's she doing today? Her vitals are still stable." "She's hanging in there," Amy replied, taking a seat by the bed. "And you? How are you holding up?" Mr. Caldwell looked at her for a moment, as if considering her question carefully. "I'm better," he said quietly. "It's strange, but I feel like I've been given a second chance. A chance to be the father I should have been all along." Amy nodded, understanding the depth of his words. She had seen it in his eyes, his regret, his realization that he had missed so much of his daughter's life. But now, he was here, fully present, and doing everything he could to make it right. There was a long silence as they both sat there, watching Jennifer. Amy knew the road ahead would be long and uncertain. But there was something about this moment, something quiet and profound, that gave her hope. "She'll come around," Amy said gently, her voice reassuring. "She has you now." Mr. Caldwell's gaze softened as he looked at his daughter. "I don't think I realized just how much I needed her until now. I've spent so many years building walls around myself, around my family. I've always been able to control everything in my life. But this is different. I can't fix it by throwing money at it." His voice trailed off as he looked down at Jennifer's hand in his. I'm just here now. That's all I can do, right?" Amy smiled, a soft, understanding smile. "Sometimes, just being there is enough," she said. "You're doing everything right." Mr. Caldwell nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you, Nurse Amy," he whispered, "for everything. I don't know how I would have gotten through this without you." Amy felt a lump form in her throat, but she kept her composure. "It's my job, and I'm glad I could be here for you both." As the morning sun began to rise, casting a soft glow through the hospital windows, Mr. Caldwell sat there, his hand still gently holding Jennifer's. Amy knew that, whatever happened, this family was healing. Not just physically, but emotionally. They were starting over, slowly but surely, and there was nothing more powerful than that. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, it felt like they were on the right path. Nurse Amy walked into Jennifer's room early the next morning, expecting the same quiet atmosphere that had greeted her the day before. But as she stepped inside, she immediately noticed the difference. Mr. Caldwell was standing by the window, his back to her, looking out over the city below. The usual tension in his shoulders was gone, replaced by a new calmness. His face, though tired, wore a look of determination. He turned as he heard Amy enter. "Morning," he said softly, his voice steady but warm. "Morning," Amy replied, setting down her clipboard. She couldn't help but notice the change in him. He looked more at peace, more grounded than he had in the past few days. "How is she?" he asked, walking back to Jennifer's side. "Still the same," Amy said, though her tone was hopeful. "She's stable, and that's the most important thing right now." Mr. Caldwell nodded, his eyes never leaving his daughter. He reached down to gently adjust Jennifer's blanket, the movement soft and careful, as if he were afraid of disturbing her. Amy watched him for a moment, then broke the silence. "I can see a difference in you," she said. Mr. Caldwell paused, glancing at her with a raised eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "You're different," Amy continued, choosing her words carefully. "You've been here, with her, day and night. It's clear that you're not just going through the motions anymore. You're really present." He gave a small, almost imperceptible smile, a smile that seemed to reach his eyes for the first time. "I didn't realize how much I was missing until now," he said quietly. "I've spent my whole life building something that was supposed to last, but I didn't realize what truly mattered. I wasn't there for Jennifer when she needed me." Amy could see the weight of his regret, but she also saw something else. There was a change happening inside of him. A realization that perhaps it was never too late to rebuild, not just the relationship with his daughter, but the relationship with himself. "You're here now," she said softly. "That's what counts. Sometimes the hardest thing is admitting that we can't fix everything on our own. But you've taken the first step." Mr. Caldwell didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked back down at Jennifer, his expression softening. "I don't know how to make it right," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I've been so focused on everything else. I've let so many moments slip by. I don't know how to fix it." Amy's heart ached for him, but she understood. The weight of the past, the missed opportunities, the regrets, it all weighed so heavily on him. But in this moment, he was present. And that was enough. "You're already doing it," she reassured him. "By being here, by staying with her. You're making a difference." Mr. Caldwell turned to her, his eyes meeting hers with a look of silent gratitude. "Thank you, Amy, for being here too, for seeing me for who I am, not just what I've done." Amy nodded, feeling the emotional weight of his words. "We all have our moments of realization," she said, her voice steady and warm. "What matters is what we do with them." There was a long silence as Mr. Caldwell sat down in the chair beside Jennifer's bed, his hand resting gently on hers. Amy stood for a moment, watching him. She could see how much he had changed in such a short amount of time. The billionaire who once seemed so unreachable was now a father, sitting by his daughter's side, offering nothing but his presence. She knew it wouldn't be an easy road for them. Jennifer had a long recovery ahead, and Mr. Caldwell still had a long way to go in repairing the emotional gaps that had existed between him and his daughter. But in this moment, they were starting over. The journey wasn't just about Jennifer's healing. It was about healing the wounds that had festered for too long. And that, Amy realized, was the most powerful kind of recovery. She turned to leave the room, her heart light with hope. This family was on the path to something better. And sometimes, that's all anyone can ask for. Nurse Amy stood in the doorway of Jennifer's room, watching the father and daughter together. Mr. Caldwell had spent days by her side, and it was clear that things were changing. Jennifer had made steady progress, and Amy knew that this recovery wasn't just about physical healing. It was about reconnecting, about rediscovering what had been lost. The emotional bond between father and daughter had started to rebuild, slowly but surely. As Amy checked the charts and adjusted the foredrip, she couldn't help but notice the small but significant changes in Jennifer's condition. The doctors had agreed that she was improving, though it would be a long road ahead. But for Amy, it wasn't just the vitals that mattered. It was the look in Mr. Caldwell's eyes. He was no longer the cold businessman who had once walked into this hospital, detached and unaware of the damage his absence had caused. Now he was a father, fully present, doing whatever he could to help his daughter heal. Mr. Caldwell had made a promise to himself, and to Jennifer, that he would not let the years slip by again. He would be there for her, no matter how long it took. And in his actions, Amy could see that he was determined to make good on that promise. As the morning passed, Amy checked in on Jennifer's progress, but it was clear that the most profound changes were happening off the charts. Mr. Caldwell had begun to speak to Jennifer more, sharing stories, reading her favorite books, and even telling her about the things he had missed in her life. Jennifer, still unconscious, couldn't respond, but Amy saw the way Mr. Caldwell's voice softened as he spoke to her. He was learning to speak the language of love, not the language of business. "I never realized how much I needed you, Jennifer," Mr. Caldwell said one afternoon, his voice almost a whisper. "I've spent so much time building things, companies, deals, legacies. But none of that matters if I can't be there for you. I've failed you, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you." Amy quietly stepped out of the room, giving them the space they needed. The words had hit her harder than she expected. She had seen her fair share of patience, but this was different. The walls Mr. Caldwell had built around himself had been torn down, brick by his own vulnerability. It was a beautiful thing to witness. Later that day, when Amy returned to check on Jennifer, she found Mr. Caldwell sitting by the window, his eyes gazing out at the city. The weight of the world seemed to have settled on his shoulders, but there was something lighter about him. He turned to Amy as she entered. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "I know I've said it before, but I can't thank you enough for everything you've done for Jennifer, for helping me see what I've been missing." Amy smiled, though her heart felt heavy. "You're doing the hard work," she replied. "Being here, showing her you care, that's what matters the most. Sometimes we need a wake-up call, but you're here now, and that's what counts." He nodded, and for the first time, he looked at peace. Amy had always believed in the power of family, its ability to heal even the deepest wounds. But seeing the transformation in Mr. Caldwell had reaffirmed that belief. There was no greater healing than the connection between loved ones, no more powerful medicine than the love of a parent for their child. As the days went by, Jennifer's health continued to improve. She wasn't out of the woods yet, but she was getting stronger every day. And as she slowly regained consciousness, Mr. Caldwell was there, by her side. The bond between them, once frayed and distant, was now being rewoven, one moment at a time. There were still many challenges ahead, but Amy felt a sense of hope that she hadn't felt in a long time. This was a family on the path to healing, not just physically, but emotionally. And that, she knew, would be the greatest gift of all. Weeks passed, and Jennifer's recovery slowly but steadily continued. She was no longer in a coma, but the process was far from easy. There were many days of uncertainty, and many more nights spent with her father by her side. Mr. Caldwell had not once left her room during this time. He had learned how to sit quietly and be there for his daughter in a way he had never done before. Every small step of progress was a victory. One afternoon, as Amy walked into Jennifer's room to check on her, she noticed a subtle yet powerful change. Jennifer, who had been unable to speak much in the days before, had her eyes open, and her lips moved, attempting to form words. It was a small moment, but it was a huge leap in her recovery. Mr. Caldwell, who had been reading aloud from one of Jennifer's favorite books, stopped immediately when he saw her attempt to speak. He leaned in closer, his voice filled with quiet emotion. "Jennifer, sweetheart, can you hear me?" he asked, his voice shaky. Jennifer blinked, her eyes focused on him, and then, to everyone's astonishment, she whispered, "Dad, I'm here." It wasn't much, but it was enough. Mr. Caldwell's eyes filled with tears, and he gently grasped her hand. "I'm here too, Jennifer," he whispered back, his voice thick with emotion. Amy watched from the doorway, a quiet smile spreading across her face. It was clear that these two, who had once been so distant from each other, were now reconnecting in a way that was truly miraculous. It wasn't just Jennifer who had made progress, it was her father, too. He had found something he had longed for, the ability to be emotionally present, to show love and care, not through grand gestures, but through simple acts of being there. As the days passed, Jennifer's recovery continued at a pace that amazed the doctors. Her strength was returning, and so was her spirit. But it was the moments she shared with her father that stood out the most. The conversations, the quiet moments of just sitting together, the shared smiles. These were the true markers of healing. One afternoon, as Jennifer was sitting up in her bed, Mr. Caldwell leaned in to kiss her forehead. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered, his hand resting on her shoulder. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Jennifer smiled weakly, her voice still faint but growing stronger every day. "I'm glad you're here, Dad," she said softly. Mr. Caldwell's heart swelled with love and pride, but also with a bittersweet realization. He had spent so much time chasing after wealth, after success, but now he understood. None of that meant anything without family. Amy watched the father and daughter together, feeling a sense of fulfillment she hadn't known before. She had seen families torn apart by ambition, by miscommunication, by misunderstanding. But this was a story of healing, of second chances. It wasn't just Jennifer who had healed, it was Mr. Caldwell too. He had let go of the walls he had built around himself, and had learned to be vulnerable, to open up, and to love. And for that, Amy knew, they were both stronger for it. A few weeks later, Jennifer was well enough to leave the hospital, but the road to full recovery was still ahead. Mr. Caldwell, though, was no longer the same man who had walked into this hospital so many weeks ago. He had transformed. He was now a father who had learned the true meaning of presence, of love, and of being there when it mattered most. As they left the hospital together, Jennifer leaning on her father's arm for support. Amy watched them from a distance, a sense of pride swelling in her chest. This wasn't just about physical healing. It was about a family healing from the inside out. As they walked toward the car, Mr. Caldwell turned to Amy and smiled. "Thank you," he said, his voice full of gratitude. "For everything. You've given us a second chance." Amy smiled back, her heart full. "It wasn't me," she replied softly. "It was always in you both. You just needed to find it." And with that, the Caldwell family walked toward a new chapter in their lives. One where love and connection came first, and everything else followed.